In the mid-17th century, life in London and Amsterdam hummed with the rhythms of trade. Along bustling canals and cobbled streets, merchants counted their fortunes, children played beneath timber-framed houses, and the promise of tomorrow was carried on every ship that sailed into port. Life was prosperous, vibrant, and interconnected. But beneath this veneer of peace, the gears of conflict were turning. The great maritime powers of England and the Netherlands, rivals for control of the world's oceans and trade routes, were on a collision course. Before the waves of war crashed upon their shores, daily life went on, but not for long. When war was declared in 1665, the first and most immediate casualties were not sailors on the high seas, but the very economic lifelines that sustained these great cities. The Second Anglo-Dutch War was a contest for naval supremacy, and its battles disrupted the intricate web of global trade. Ships carrying spices from the East Indies, sugar from the colonies, and timber from the Baltic were captured or forced to stay in port. Suddenly, the once bustling marketplaces of London and the dockyards of Amsterdam grew quiet. The flow of goods slowed to a trickle, and prices for everyday necessities began to climb. Bread, fish, and fuel became luxuries for many. Families whose livelihoods depended on the sea sailors, dock workers, shipbuilders, and merchants found themselves without work. Idle hands and empty pockets became a common sight in the port districts. The grand strategies of admirals and kings were paid for by the hunger and hardship of ordinary people. The hidden cost of war was being tallied not in sunken ships, but in the anxious faces of families struggling to survive. As the war dragged on, an invisible enemy crept into every home: fear. Life became a tense waiting game, punctuated by the ringing of church bells that signaled either victory or disaster. News from the front lines, carried by breathless messengers or sailors from surviving ships, could make or break public morale in an instant. A naval defeat meant more than just a strategic loss. It meant that fathers, sons, and husbands might never return. It meant the enemy fleet could be just over the horizon. In coastal towns, the threat was palpable. Families would huddle in their homes at the sound of an alarm, peering through windows at streets that were suddenly deserted. The shadow of enemy raiders loomed large, and the fear of invasion was constant. For civilians, the war wasn't a distant affair of cannons and sails. It was a persistent anxiety that settled over their daily lives like a thick fog. Children were kept indoors, and a general gloom replaced the once vibrant energy of the city. Every rumor, every distant sound fueled the uncertainty that gnawed at the heart of the home front. The war did not create hardship in a vacuum. It amplified the miseries that already haunted 17th century life. In 1665, the same year the war began, the Great Plague swept through London. The city became a landscape of death, with crowded citadels and carts collecting the dead. The war made a horrific situation even worse. Resources that could have been used to fight the plague were diverted to the war effort. Trade disruptions meant less food for the weak and less medicine for the sick. For those who fled the plague-ridden cities for the countryside, they found themselves displaced, often without work or shelter. In both England and the Netherlands, the war created a new class of victims, those stranded far from home. Sailors on captured ships were imprisoned, leaving their families destitute. Merchants who had invested everything in a single voyage were ruined overnight. The war's reach was long, touching even those who never saw a ship or heard a cannon. It was a relentless pressure that compounded disease, poverty, and displacement, trapping countless civilians in a web of suffering from which there was no easy escape. But even in the darkest of times, the human spirit endures. After long years of conflict, hardship, and loss, the war finally came to an end in 1667. Slowly, tentatively, life began to return to the cities. The docks, once silent, began to stir with the sounds of rebuilding. Shipbuilders hammered new hulls, and merchants once again tallied their goods, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and weariness. The marketplaces gradually filled, and the cheerful chaos of commerce returned. Children who had spent months in the shadow of fear reclaimed the streets with their games. The sailing of the first post-war trading ships was a symbol of hope, a promise of a return to normalcy. Yet the scars remained. The families who lost loved ones, the businesses that were ruined, the communities that were shattered, they carried the true burden of the conflict. History often measures war in ships sunk and battles won, but its real toll is always felt at home, in the quiet, resilient hearts of the people who lived through it. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more stories from the past.